Hi guys, welcome and welcome back to Tila Fashion. On today's video, we're going to be making this underbust corset inspired by the famous Kylie Jenner underbust corset. So if that's something you're interested in, you should definitely keep watching. I have my pattern paper with me here and I already put down some measurements just to save time. I have my shoulder measurements, my armhole, shoulder to underbust, shoulder to waist, and my shoulder to hip measurements, which you should have taken earlier from your clients. And I also have my dart line, and the distance between the center front and the dart line is 4 inches. In order to give the platform some shape, I'm going to come over to the dart line at the level of the waistline, and I'm going to take ½ inch to the left and to the right of that dart line, making a total of 1 inch, and this will just help cinch in the waistline. So after finishing with the darts, I'll just go ahead and take the round measurements. I'll take my underbust measurement divided by 4. Whatever I get, I'm just going to mark it out. You don't need to add a lot of allowance. I added 1 inch allowance to the round measurement, but you might not even need up to 1 inch seam allowance. ½ inch is okay, but I took 1 inch here. And then at the waist, I'm going to divide my waist measurements by 4, and before adding back my seam allowance, I'll make sure to add back the 1 inch I took at the darts before I would add my seam allowance. Then I'll do the same thing at the hip, same thing I did with the underbust, divide it by 4 and add my seam allowance. Now I'm going to go ahead to take out 2 centimeters at the center front, because we want a little space at the center front. We don't want the fabric showing, we want just the lace showing at that point. So the lace will occupy that space, and this will be our new center front. So we can go ahead to start forming the corset, the triangular shape of the corset. So I'm going to go to the new center front there, and I'm going to mark 1 inch above the underbust line. So now that we've done the top, I will go ahead to form the shape for the side. So for the side, I'm taking 2.5 inches above the waistline and 1 inch below the waistline, making a total of 3.5 inches. So I went ahead to make our pattern a little thicker with my marker pen, just to separate the measurement from the rest of the measurements. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead to add my seam allowance at the top, bottom and sides, and I'm going to leave the seam allowance for the darts for later. So I'm taking 1 cm seam allowance. So I'll just go ahead to mark out the back piece now, and first thing I'm going to do is just extend the bottom and top lines, because the top and bottom of the back piece will just be straight. So now I can start putting down my measurements. So I'm just going to be putting down the side seam allowance, just like the side seam allowance for the front piece. So whatever I took as the side seam allowance for the front piece, I'm just going to put it back down for the back piece too. Next measurement I'm going to put down is the waist measurement divided by 4. So whatever I get, I'll just put it down from the seam allowance there. So that will be how wide the back piece would be. Next, I'll go ahead to mark out my dart, and I'll be marking it 4 inches away from the center back line. So I went ahead to just add seam allowance at the center back there because I'll be cutting that open. So this is the final look now, and I'll just go ahead to cut this out so that I can cut it out on my fabric. And then while cutting it out on my fabric, I'm going to cut out the seam allowance for the dart too at that point. Now we have the separated front and back pieces. I'm just going to go ahead to separate the rest of the pieces. So I've gone ahead to cut the pattern on fabric, and I also added my 1 cm seam allowance at the dart lines because I couldn't add it while creating the pattern, but we need to add it here with the fabric. If not, when we're done sewing, it will be shorter than it should be. So yes, this is what I have now. I have my lining and fabric pieces. I also went ahead to attach my interface to the fabric and the lining pieces so it can be a little bit firmer, just so the corset can be firm. Onto sewing, first thing I'm going to do is to sew the fabric pieces together and then sew the lining pieces together, and I'm just arranging them now so I don't end up mixing them up. So this center back piece, I haven't cut it out yet, but I'm going to end up cutting it out later on because there's supposed to be a dart line there also for my boning. So I went ahead to join the pieces together, and this is what I have for my fabric piece, and this is the back, and this is what I have for my lining piece. So I'm going to go ahead to iron this out and also iron out the dart lines. So after ironing out, I'm just going to go ahead to create channels with my bias tape for my boning. So this is what I have now. I didn't add bias on the second channel there because the allowance was enough to use to create the channel. So I'm just going to go ahead to cut out my boning. I'll be using this plastic boning, and I'm going to cut each of the boning that I'll be putting in each of the channel to be about 1 inch shorter than the channel itself, because we'll still be sewing the edges of the fabric. And after cutting it out, I'm going to bond the edges because if I leave it out like that, the edges will be sharp and they could pierce through the clothing. So this is what I have after passing the boning through the channels, and what I'm going to do now is to take the lining piece and place it on the fabric front side facing each other, and then I'm going to go ahead to sew the bottom and the sides. So I'm sewing only the bottom and the sides so I can turn it inside out. Because of how small the corset is, we couldn't sew in the top at the same time with the bottom, so we have to do the top separately now. So I'm just going to turn it inside out a bit, just like this. I'm not turning it inside out completely, just a bit. So I would turn it inside out like that and then sew. I'll just sew whatever I can to the point that I can't keep sewing, or to the point that I know I won't be able to turn it back inside out, and then I'll go ahead to turn it back inside out, and I'll do the same thing for the other side. I'll just use tape gum to close up the space over there, and then also go ahead to iron it. So after fixing the eyelets, I went ahead to lace it with the fabric, and this is the final look. Thank you guys so much for watching this video till the end. I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were able to learn something from this video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, turn on your post notifications so you get notified each time I post, and share this video to someone it might be helpful to. Thank you, and I'll see you in my next video.